In this video, I'm going to be breaking down a standard interior detail, how to avoid some of the most common areas where detailers end up damaging interiors, and we're going to be talking about what made this interior detail a little bit unique with this particular customer. Now, you guys are getting an in-depth look at the before of the interior, and yes, this particular customer has kids, which has contributed to how dirty the interior is. But aside from just the classic staining and dirt and debris that's collected on things like the carpets, which is really the most obvious part of what you guys are seeing, you will also see kind of a thin layer of dirt that has accrued on all of the door panels, console, dashboard, and leather areas, including the seats, that ends up having to be kind of scrubbed away with what you'll see as magic erasers, non-abrasive scrub pads, and kind of what I would call that hidden dirt that is where the detailer brings in what he or she knows that the customer might not even be able to see. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing on this interior is using my Interior Express cleaner and scrubbing the door panels down and then moving inward. Now, the reason I'm scrubbing things down with my detailing brushes or non-abrasive scrub pads is because you cannot clean off or pull off that thin layer of dirt that I'm describing that accrues on these areas if you're just using a microfiber towel. And if you do, you're going to be scrubbing so hard, wasting a ton of time, that you're probably just going to come out unprofitable at the end. Now, the simple sort of streamlined system you're going to see me use on door panels and lots of parts of the interior that I call the hard rubbers, vinyls, leathers, and plastics. That includes things like the dashboard, the console, the door panels, the plastics that line the carpets, all of those kind of miscellaneous, again, hard rubber, vinyl, plastic, leather areas. This is kind of the approach that I use. I'm spraying with my cleaner, I'm scrubbing with the appropriate tool, non-abrasive scrub pad, magic eraser, detailing brush, and then I'm going to be mopping up the excess suds, coming in for a final rinse with the steamer to blow out all of the cracks and crevices where those suds kind of sit, to make sure the dirt and debris is blown out of those small areas, and to ultimately just pull off the residue of the cleaner itself. The first major area that detailers often find themselves in trouble when they're doing an interior detail like this is that they're working on plastics like this door panel that have not been cleaned. It's a very standard interior detail. It's a customer who is not a maintenance client, right? So it's not taken care of, but it's older than this Highlander, and it's generally a darker colored interior like the black plastic you see lining the door panels. Sometimes when you take a steamer to those areas, you easily fade that plastic and you can only see it after it's dried. So often you don't even see it in the moment. It's not until 20 minutes later in the interior detail you glance at the door panel and you think to yourself, did I do that? Now, before I highlight how to avoid this with a steamer, you must get the chemical you're using right first. It's why I suggest the P&S Interior Express cleaner. It is a very safe, it's gentle, but it's also an effective cleaner. It was originally designed, I believe, as a leather cleaner, and because of that, it's a very risk-free cleaner. It is not the only interior APC I use, but in this situation, it's what's most appropriate because the car is not detailed regularly. I want to make sure I'm not damaging anything. Now, before we talk about anything else, like I said, you've got to get your chemicals right. And so if you want to get a complete guide or list of the products and tools you need for your detailing business and you're confused about where to get this information, check out the YouTube description box below. I've got a link to something completely free that I call the Pro Detailing Toolbox. It's a complete video series, complete PDFs, and complete audio files for any way you want to consume this information, where it collates all of the chemicals and the products that you need in your detailing business, discounts on where to get them, special discounts as a member of the Pro Detailing Toolbox. You've got master dilution ratios, off-label uses, everything you could ever want to know about these products. So if you're confused about where to get this stuff, how to use it, what you should get, what you shouldn't get, that's the resource you need. It's totally free because I think this information should be free to detailers. Now back to the interior detail. After I've gotten my chemical right, I then have to make sure that the steamer is something that's safe to use. The reason why I'm using it here is only because, like I said, this Highlander is a little bit newer. When I say newer, I don't mean 2022, 2023, like 2 years, 1 year, half a year old. I'm talking like generally speaking, and this is just a rule of thumb that can be kind of used as a guideline, not an actual rule, let's say under a decade old. When you have a car that's like over 8 years, over 10 years, over 12 years old, often this is the car that the customer has been using as a daily driver, right? They hand it down to their 16-year-old. It's not really taken care of. Those are the areas where you are most likely to get something, damaged on the interior. On those interiors, I rarely use a steamer other than on the carpets. I will simply break out my air compressor because the way that I'm using it on this particular interior is, in some sense, like I would use an air compressor. I'm using it to blow out the seams and the cracks and crevices of the areas that I'm otherwise cleaning with my detailing brushes and my chemicals. I don't have to use a steamer in this application. It makes things a little bit quicker because I can avoid using chemicals on certain areas like you see me doing now. I'm not using an APC on any of those buttons to the left of the steering wheel because my steam and kind of the hot water or vapor from that is going to clean it just fine, and it's also going to double as that sort of air compressor use, which is blowing out the seams. But my point is, on those older, darker colored vehicles, I will only use an air compressor because it accomplishes the same thing, and I can use the, surface cleaning. I can just use my APC. Now, in my experience, the type of damage that you're going to see when you do something wrong, or you just use a steamer on top of chemical on top of the surfaces that we're describing, which are older, damaged, heavy dirt, and darker colored, you're just going to see basically a faded appearance. So it's gonna look kind of like a chemical burn, right? It's like a faded, whiter, cloudy, foggy appearance on the plastic. It's particularly prevalent on areas like you see me steaming right now, which is like where the blinker is, or the smoother black plastics. Often you will get a quote-unquote chemical burn on these areas using stronger alkaline cleaners that aren't P&S Interior Express Cleaner. And I want to reiterate, I love using really strong alkaline cleaners, and I use them all the time in my detailing business, but it is knowing when to use them and when not to use them as just a risk mitigator. Secondly, what you might see is kind of a trail left over from the steamer. What often happens is you use a chemical on top of these areas that already sort of makes that area weak, or let's say the top layer of that area weak. Then you come in a little too close with a steamer, and all of a sudden it looks like you took a white pen and drew all across the door panel, because every area that the steamer touched a little bit too closely started to get faded, and it looks like there's this little point that kind of was dragged all across the door panel. And there's really no way to fix this other than covering it up with some sort of dressing. So the only way to make sure it doesn't happen is to not do it in the first place. Now I'm jumping to the steering wheel next, and you're going to see me clean it in my favorite way to clean every steering wheel, which is a simple non-abrasive scrub pad and the all-purpose cleaner that I'm using. The reason why this is such an easy to damage area is because the steering wheel, like I always say, is something that is always touched no matter who's in the car, because no matter who's in the car, the driver always has to be in the car for the car to be used. And so the steering wheel is the one thing that every single time the car is in use is being touched, and therefore it gets extremely dirty and also very broken down over time. Think about it, right? We're moving our hands over this area. You can think about it like water and rocks and sort of like erosion over time. We're kind of like eroding the surface level area of the steering wheel just by moving our hands across it all the time, not to mention the dirt that gets on there. Because of that, even a non-abrasive scrub pad can actually pull the leather off. And so what you need to look for here is, when I'm scrubbing the steering wheel, can I see that black color being basically transferred onto my non-abrasive scrub pad? If it is, I need to stop, and the only cleaning I'm going to do on the steering wheel is with a microfiber towel. I'm not going to do anything else. Yes, that means dirt is going to be left over, but it also means that I'm not going to be pulling the leather off. This is a very sensitive type of leather. It's not real leather, and it kind of has this clear coat surface on it, much like leather seats do. Because of that, it is actually pretty easy to damage. It's relatively cheap, and so once the dirt sits on there long enough, you're really not going to be able to pull all of it off without pulling the leather off itself. Now I'm going to jump down to the console and the cup holder area, because there's a few areas here where if you've not done this before, you might be surprised that you damaged something without meaning to. The first thing I want to highlight here is the cup holders themselves. Because they get so dirty, this is an area where you can overuse a steamer. Now, I'm a huge fan of a steamer, and I should qualify all of this. I love using a steamer. I use it basically every day of my life. I would never stop using a steamer. All I'm trying to do is give some qualifications here to help you manage the risk. With hyper dirty areas like cup holders that are also very durable because they're made of plastic and they're actually pretty hard to damage, you can use a steamer too close, too frequently, too often, for too long, and you do the exact same thing that I was describing with the door panels, where you leave these white streaks all over the cup holders, and you don't want to do that. Here's the way I avoid that. If the cup holders are particularly dirty, before I even start the detail, I spray my all-purpose cleaner in the cup holders, and I let them sit for like 15 minutes so that I can work from the door panel inwardly to the steering wheel and then into the console after the radio buttons. By that point, that chemical's been sitting there for like 15-20 minutes. It's loosened everything up, and it minimizes the use of the steamer that I have to implement. So it's a very simple way to fix that. The second area I want to highlight is the area you see on screen right now, just around the transmission. Oftentimes, because you've got the park, reverse, neutral, drive, and different gears here, you have to make sure that you're not getting water behind those areas. In other words, those areas are kind of like plastic coated like the speedometer is, and so when you're blasting a steamer down there, you need to be cognizant that if any of those areas are not totally watertight, which they often aren't, you can get water vapor in that plastic clear housing, where it makes it difficult to see the park, reverse, neutral, drive letters, and it's because you shot water behind there. Sometimes you can fix it by blasting an air compressor down there and maybe even using a vacuum in order to try to suck it out, but it's not always possible. And so the only thing you need to basically make sure you're doing is very quickly kind of testing this in an inconspicuous area. And of course, if you can find that you're not getting any water behind there, it's not something I worry about too much. I will say, no matter what kind of car I'm working on, I don't hold a steamer in those areas very often, and I'll almost always default to a detailing brush rather than something like a steamer, and I'll couple it with a toothbrush to get in those tiny cracks and crevices, because that's where you really need the steamer. Otherwise, it takes kind of a long time. Now, I'm skipping the rest of the interior and jumping to the vacuuming and the carpet shampooing area here, because when we use vacuums as detailers, if you're doing this on a day-to-day basis, you know that this is not something you're thinking about very much. Like when you're throwing a vacuum around, it's often just kind of like, okay, I'm getting this done, getting the car in and out, and moving on with my life. I'm not being super meticulous with the vacuum. It's not one of those super detailed areas of the interior detail. Because of that, it's an area where you can accidentally damage things, especially when you're using a crevice tool like this, where you use it on everything. What ends up happening is the plastic starts to fray at the end of the crevice tool, especially as you're using it on a ton of different cars and you're throwing it around and it's hitting the gravel and maybe the asphalt and driveways. And ultimately, if you use it and take it from something like the carpet to the leather seats, you can cause things to fray or rip through the leather because that hard plastic on the crevice tool is frayed up. Well, the simplest way to fix this is to get a little dual action polisher with some sandpaper, maybe 800 or 600, and literally sand down the tip of your vacuum so that it is soft. And I actually do this maybe every 10 to 20 cars that I'm detailing. I'll just quickly sand down the tip of the vacuum to keep it from really getting that plastic on any sort of leather or console pieces. Now, in addition to that, one of the easiest ways to speed up my carpet shampooing process, because it is one of the more time-consuming parts of interior detailing, is to use my steamer. And I don't want to go into detail about how I use my steamer, but I will say, when you are doing the carpets, one very common thing detailers notice is that the runners of the, basically the seat, where it clips into those runners that moves the seat forward and backward, because there's grease in that and you're vacuuming out, under the seats and you've got a detailed eye, you notice that there tends to be a ton of dirt and debris and nastiness that collects in there, because it's like a pocket for dirt, especially with all of the grease in there that allows the seat to move back and forth. It's a magnet for dirt. The problem is, if you spend a ton of time trying to clean that out, not only are you going to ruin a lot of tools and equipment because you get a bunch of grease on the stuff, but you're also going to remove the grease that's actually supposed to be there. It's kind of synonymous with like door jamb cleaning. You got to clean it, but you got to know when to stop. Well, the simple way that I fix this is by running the steamer in and out of those areas really, really quickly. I don't really use any chemical, and then I come back in with the vacuum to vacuum up the debris that's now sitting on the surface of the carpet. Outside of that, I'll take a microfiber towel that's reserved for sidewalls of the tires as well as engines, do 1 or 2 quick swipes after the steamer, and I'll move on with my life. It's an area that's always going to look relatively dirty in cars like this that aren't maintained, but better that than remove it completely and basically have the seat ruined because you're scraping metal on metal. Now, for those of you who stuck around till the end of the video, I want to give you a little sales tactic that helped me, that I've learned over the years, and I often implement in situations like this when I'm on the phone with a customer who's negotiated on price. Generally speaking, most of my customers these days don't push back on price at all, but when people do, like they did here, it's often because the car is in such bad condition that it is going to take several hours to restore it and really make a difference that the customer even notices in the first place. Well, this particular detail, let's just say it was around $300. The person on the other end immediately pushed back and said, listen, there's somebody else who's willing to do this for about $100, and he said it's only going to take maybe around an hour and a half. Well, what I like to do is kind of work back the numbers when somebody pushes back like that and actually bring things into an hourly rate. Let's say the $100 guy can do it in 1 hour. He is therefore $100 per hour. Let's say we're charging this particular person $300 and it's going to take around 5 hours. That actually comes out to a lower than $100 per hour hourly rate. And I like to throw in that particular price is going to ensure that you get the condition of your car raised to the highest level of perfection that is within the realm of possibility. And so if we think about it like that, not only are you guaranteeing the results that you want, but you're also going to guarantee them for a much cheaper hourly rate than the other guy. The problem with the other guy is that we know from experience you cannot get the results that you're describing you want from an hour-long job, which tells us when you get him to do it, you are going to overpay and ultimately probably have to come back to us anyways and pay a new price on top of one that didn't get you what you wanted. And so, customer, while yes, it sounds cheaper in the moment, actually it isn't. That's what I call working the numbers backwards, and it can be a very helpful kind of sales technique over the phone because your goal is to give the customer what they want. You know what they want is not feasible for the price that they're describing, and anyone who says they can do it for that is probably just blowing smoke, and they're going to be doing things that are a bit, let's just say, cutting corners to be generous. And your job, of course, as the detailer is to give them the best experience possible and to deliver on what it is that they're asking for. Guys, remember, if you are not already subscribed to the Pro Detailing Toolbox, all you got to do is get the link below, completely free. Put your email in. We'll send it to your email inbox. It is a total list, all in one place, of tools and products that I suggest. We give you discounts to access to all of these things. It's not sponsored by anyone. We don't get paid to do this. I literally just wanted to answer the question, hey, Luke, what are the tools and products I need as a pro detailer, and put all that information in one place. What about dilution ratios? What about off-label uses? What about dilution ratios for different types of applications in different situations, because we know you have to change things in different situations? What about quick access information to PDF so I don't have to constantly watch videos about all of this? All of that is in the Pro Detailing Toolbox completely for free because, unfortunately, this information is kind of hard to get. Guys, thank you so much for being involved, and from Luke here at Wilson Auto Detailing, remember, a great detailer is always learning, and I'll see you in the next video.